There were times when he had to resort to body language. Perhaps for Italians, English is just a hard language to learn. I can think of two possibilities.
Ambassadors, yes. And Mr. Pavel, okay, so we can be all seated. I'll just make some remarks and then inviting for so that'll be this.
You want to take
This would
masks
be,
off?
yeah.
Masks on or off?
A lot of cameras. Sorry. Yes, we have very strict. Sorry about going through the pictures.
OK， 各位女士、各位先生，欢迎大家来到今天这个记者会。我们今天非常荣幸，我们请到了美国的前国防部长艾斯培Dr. Mark Esper， 他所带领的这个 Atlantic Council 美国大西洋理事会的一个联合的一个记者会。So, ladies and gentlemen, friends from the press, and also for our friends who are receiving right now our live transmission, welcome to this international press conference we're hosting to welcome our friends from the Atlantic Council, and which is led by the Honorable Dr. Mark Esper. He is the former U.S. Secretary of Defense. And with him, also we have also our distinguished guests from the delegation. We have here Ambassador, also Stefano Stefanini. He was also the former diplomatic advisor to the President of Italy. And also together here we have Mr. Baro Pavel. He's the Senior Vice President of the Atlantic Council. And this is really a long waiting. We've been waiting for the arrival of the visit of the Honorable Dr. Mark Esper. And really, it's really an honor and a pleasure having you here with us, sir. Okay, so I think I will first invite Dr. Esper to address the audience, and after they all say something, before we proceed to take your questions, then we have like a group picture. 我们先请他讲话，讲完话再合照，可以吗？ Is that okay? Yes? Okay, they said they can wait for the picture. So, sir, welcome.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction and for the welcome that has been extended to us by the government of Taiwan for the Atlantic Council delegation. I'm pleased to not just lead the delegation, but to lead a delegation comprised of both American and European perspectives, as represented by Ambassador Stefanini. That said, it is personally nice for me to be back in Taipei. It's been a number of years. I've always enjoyed my friends here in Taiwan, and to come back and have important discussions about the security, economic, and diplomatic relations between the United States and Taiwan is very critically important. When I was Secretary of Defense, my top priority was implementing a national defense strategy that said that we are now in an era of great power competition. That competition was mainly against China, followed by Russia. There were some that doubted that until just this year, when Russia brutally and unprovoked invaded the people of Ukraine. That war continues with the great loss of life and devastation to Ukraine. And it shows that we live in a dangerous world. That said, I believe the greatest strategic challenge facing the United States, and indeed the West, in the 21st century is China. For those reasons, it is important that the democracies of the world be prepared to stand up against the autocracies of the world, autocracies led by the likes of Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. And so this week, the discussions we've had so far, to include with President Tsai today, have been very fruitful. We've shared a lot of very good ideas and recommendations about how our countries can move forward and how we can continue to strengthen the international view with regard to Taiwan and China. And so I hope to elaborate on some of our discussions today, some of my personal views with regard to the situation across the Taiwan Strait, and what the democracies of the world need to do to defend this international order of rules and laws and norms that have brought peace and prosperity to much of the world since the end of World War II. It is an important gift that we need to preserve if freedom-loving people like those in Taiwan, those in the United States and Europe and elsewhere want to continue to expand individual liberties and freedoms, much like we have appreciated now for several decades. So thank you once again for that introduction.
Thank you very much, Dr. Esper. We definitely need translation for those very important remarks.
非常感谢刚刚的引言，也非常感谢台湾政府对我的欢迎，对我们大西洋理事会的访团欢迎。这次欢迎我们的不只是大西洋理事会这个智库团体，也是包括了我们有 Stefanini 的外交顾问跟我们随行，等于是我们代表了美国以及欧洲的视角。那我也很高兴能够在久违台湾之后呢，再回来见到许多久违的朋友。之前呢，我都会固定回来跟台湾的朋友讨论许多安全、经济还有台美外交等议题。 我担任国防部长期间，我当时制定的许多的防卫政策，其实都跟与中俄之间的力量的竞争有关系。那如今我们也看到了，俄罗斯真的就无端的入侵了乌克兰，这个战争持续当中也引发了非常大的死伤。但即便如此，我仍认为21世纪当中最大的战略的对手呢，还是中国，尤其是全世界的民主国家，应该要准备好，要对着习近平以及对普丁要站起来捍卫自己，正是这样的时候。那在这样的时候呢，我也很高兴能够今早跟蔡英文总统有一个非常成果丰硕的一次谈话。我们讨论了台湾跟美国各自应该怎么样往前面迈进，未来该怎么做。那今天呢，我也想要借这个机会跟大家分享我们今天所讨论的丰硕的成果，在海峡两岸地区，在台湾海峡这个地区该怎么样去维持我们的平衡、我们的稳定与和平，以及如何以及所有的民主国家应该如何致力于维持好不容易在2次大战之后这几十年以来我们所打造的世界秩序以及国际的规则，以及要怎么样持续捍卫在台湾、在美国以及在欧洲我们所享有几十年的自由生活。
Thank you very much. And next, I would like to invite Ambassador Stefano Stefanini to address the audience. Ambassador.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, to be invited to accompany Secretary Esper and to bring, say, a European view to, I must say that paradoxically, the crisis that we're facing in Europe with the Ukrainian war has brought the issue of Taiwan and the relationship of Taiwan with China closer to a European view than before. So I think there's a much more a realization that security is a continuum. There cannot be security in Europe on the Atlantic without security in East Asia. And this is why the stability and peace in East Asia and on the Taiwan Strait is important also for Europe.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We need also translation. Thank you, 嘉豪。
非常开心能够跟着艾斯培前国防部长能够来到这边，甚至也顺便把欧洲方面的视角也跟着这个理事会的团呢带到台湾来。那事实上讽刺的事情呢，事实上在欧洲以在乌克兰所引发的危机呢，使得欧洲呢更加的正视台湾方面的议题，还有中国方面的议题。那我们也意识到说，其实欧洲的安全跟东亚的安全也是联动的，因此对我们欧洲人来讲呢，其实在东亚的稳定也是非常的重要。
Thank you very much. And next, I will give the floor to Mr. Barry Pavel. He's the Senior Vice President of the Atlantic Council.
Thank you very much, and it's a real honor to be here. I think I'll just make 3 very brief points. I think number one, where I like to start is we're really in a new era of history, and this is really what I call a geopolitical moment, where you're seeing, as Secretary Esper suggested, you're seeing some aggressive great powers taking really aggressive action. Russia invading Ukraine for no reason. China increasing its coercion and aggression against Taiwan and in a lot of other domains. And so second, I think the effect that this is having is the democratic world is coming together like never before. The fact that European and Asian democratic partners are working together on a wide range of fronts is really remarkable. And as Secretary Esper has said, Taiwan is at the front lines and now has growing support across this region, but also across Europe. So it's really Taiwan's time to shine. And then lastly, there is a lot to do to make sure that deterrence of Chinese aggression is sustained. We'll talk about some of the details. It's asymmetric, but it's also a lot of basic things that just need to be done. And so I'll end by saying that Taiwan's own vigorous investments will really help it to achieve its goals, but also help others to come to its, continue to strengthen their assistance to Taiwan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pavel. The translation, 嘉豪, thanks.
非常荣幸能够前来，我们现在迈入了一个新的时代，也迈入了一个新的地缘政治的时刻。现在呢， 威权的国家正在非常积极的，像是俄罗斯在无端的侵略乌克兰还有在中国，在各方面呢也都在胁迫着台湾。所以呢，可以看到，其实很多威权的国家都越来越大胆了。那当然，现在全世界的许多的民主国家也都非常前所未有的团结起来，像欧美的民主国家跟亚太的民主国家也都积极的在合作，成果都非常的丰硕。台湾站在中国威胁的第一线，事实上，台湾也获得了许多不只是这个地区，甚至其他地区民主伙伴前所未有的支持也在成长当中。事实上呢，为了要确保台湾的对于中国嚇阻能够持续下去呢，需要做的工作还很多。这些工作还包括了不对称作战的工作，还有许多基本的准备。那台湾当然这方面的准备以及投资都非常的积极。那台湾如此的积极，除了对自己的目标有利之外，也会更进一步的让许多愿意帮助台湾的国家呢，更加的有意愿。
Thank you very much. Okay, so before we proceed to responding to questions, I know there's a lot of questions. How about we just, we have a group picture first, right? I know the photographer has been waiting. 我们先照一张相，好不好？然后我们就马上回答大家的问题，因为好多。And also acknowledge the presence of Regine here. She's the Deputy Director of North American Department. 我们外交部北野司惠珍副司长就跟我们一起上来照相，好不好？ We proceed with taking a picture really quick, and then we respond to the questions and the Q&A. Okay? Thank you. Okay, that was a very fun part of it. And okay, we proceed with the questions. I know there's a lot of questions. Here I have 5 pages, okay, of pre-submit questions. So we're going to do by group. And we'll do the first group. Okay, let me check here. We do the first group of, many are asking about the defense exchanges, and also the U.S.-Taiwan relations, and will there be national defense exchanges and some insight that Secretary Esper can enlighten us. I'm going to read the questions and allow our guests to respond if they wish. Okay? 我先帮大家念一下这个第一个类别，我们先做这个台湾跟美国的然后还有这个有关国防的交流，然后第二类我们再做有关经贸议题，大家有人问很多有关经贸区域的，然后在第三类我们就特别针对美国跟台湾还有中国的议题的，我们大概分这几类。好，我们先做第一类的。我们也说到这个汉声广播电台，这个敬语的这个问题from Voice of Han Broadcasting Network from 这个敬语。然后他这一次来访呢，他想请问这个国防部长在国防议题上有没有任何的建议，或是与我国的政府有所交流互动。And Voice of Han is asking, on this visit, is the Secretary going to provide Taiwan with any suggestions regarding its national defense? Or have you engaged in any relevant interaction with the Taiwanese government? Can you share some of your insight with us? Thank you. Also, we received from Vanguard Media from 洪章前进新闻网洪章在问，请问艾斯培部长，您认为台湾跟美国是不是已经就防止中共解放军对台湾动武做好了准备了吗？包括军事、外交还有经济上的作为。另外，如果台美还没有做好准备的话，有哪一些欠缺的部分？And here, Hong Zhang wants to ask Secretary Esper, do you regard Taiwan and the U.S. as well prepared for PLA and CCP maneuverings, including military, diplomatic, and economic actions against Taiwan? If Taiwan and the United States are not fully prepared, what are aspects you think it could be still lacking? Also from Vanguard Media, also from Hong Zhang, his second questions, it's about Taiwan overall defense concept must emphasize in asymmetric warfare capabilities. However, it could be some Taiwanese political military figure might hold different ideas regarding the conventional air, sea, and land forces. What are your opinions in this regard? 洪章在问有关于台湾的整体防卫的构想 ，ODC 认为要强调非对称，就是不对称的这个战力哦。但是或许还是有一些政治军事界的人有不同的意见哦，应该要强调，譬如说陆海空团种作战。所以想请问这个部长哦对此如何看 ？Okay, so these are the three questions. Shall we go these three first, Mr. Secretary?
Sure, thank you for those questions. I think first, with regard to my views on Taiwan's defensive capabilities, what I shared are the following. First of all, I think that Taiwan needs to make a significant increase in its defense budget. Secondly, I think the strategy of Taiwan needs to emphasize asymmetric warfare against its larger neighbor. Third, it needs to procure or produce the capabilities consistent with an asymmetric warfare approach. And we can talk about what that means. Javelin anti-tank systems, Stinger anti-air systems, HIMARS, etc. Number three, I believe that Taiwan needs to both lengthen and toughen its conscription. That means to have young Taiwanese boys and girls serve at least 1 year, if not longer, in their nation's military. And fourth, I think there needs to be a revitalization and activation of the reserve mobilization to make sure that is prepared for any type of conflict, again, as a deterrent capability against China. Those are the core recommendations that I would make toward Taiwan's leaders. I think those are critical first steps in order to ensure that Taiwan is as capable and as ready as possible to deter Chinese activities against it, and also to make sure that they would work consistent with the United States and other allies in the region. Second, with regard to the question, are we prepared? Is the United States and Taiwan prepared to deal with China? I think we are prepared, but could always be better prepared, particularly as China continues to modernize its own military. As Secretary of Defense, I spent a lot of time focusing on modernization of the United States military. With regard to the Navy, that meant building a bigger, stronger, more capable, more distributed naval force structure. I spent time as Secretary of the Army modernizing the United States Army, prepared for warfare in the Pacific, the Western Pacific. Our Air Force needs to continue to develop its capabilities across both fighter, bomber, and tanker spectrum capabilities. We need to continue to build the Space Force and our cyber capabilities. So there are a whole number of capabilities we need to prepare against for in all domains of warfare. With regard to Taiwan, I think those same areas need to be looked at. But again, I think the emphasis should be on asymmetric warfare. And it should, again, making sure that Taiwan as a country, as a people, are well armed, that is a nation under arms, first and foremost, prepared to deter a Chinese invasion or attack of some kind. And then with regard to the last point on asymmetric warfare capabilities, I think I've addressed that. My sense is that there is a consensus largely within Taiwan's political leadership that a move toward asymmetric warfare makes sense, and that there is the willingness to do that. In my view, that's very good. However, it needs to move very quickly because we have no sense of timing on the Chinese side. And I think a move, making those moves that I recommended with regard to increasing the defense budget, purchasing asymmetric capabilities, lengthening conscription, and revitalizing reserve mobilization will also send the right political signals to Washington and to other Taiwan friends around the world that Taiwan is very, very serious about its self-defense, and that it takes it upon itself to understand that its defense relies on the Taiwan people first and foremost. And I think that gives certainly the United States more confidence in terms of supporting our friends here in the Western Pacific.
Excellent. Thank you so very much, Secretary Esper. Definitely we need translation. Thank you.
第一个问题，台 谈到防卫能力，台湾的防卫能力的建构方面，我有几点建议哦。首先，第一个就是台湾应该要增加国防预算，再来就是台湾的防卫策略应该要强调，因为面对更大的邻居，必须强调不对称作战。再来就是台湾在武器上面无论是购买还是自己研发，必须要能够跟得上这样子的不对称作战的能力。例如说要有刺针飞弹啦，要有 HIMARS 的飞弹等等。那再来就是说，希望说台湾的义务兵役呢能够延长，能够训练得更加的精实。那役期呢建议是在1年以上。那再来第4点呢，就是说希望说能够进一步再回顾，并且加强台湾对于后备军人的动员能力。那以上的这4点呢，基本上我在此次访问的行程当中，跟各个相关的领导人都有相关的分享。那我都认为说这些的作为呢，都是具体的步骤，能够彰显台湾不但是有能力防卫自己，随时都是准备好防卫自己的，这样子才能够让美国以及美国在这个地区的盟友呢，能够跟台湾能够同调，台湾能够跟美国以及美国在亚太地区的盟友呢，能够在防卫上面是同调、是同步的。那就问说，台湾跟美国是否已经准备好了？的确是准备好，只是好还可以更好。那例如说，像我们都看到中国都积极在现代化他们的军队，那事实上因此呢，美国也是积极在现代化自己美国的军队，就意思是在西太平洋这边，我们也是非常强调，就是我们可能要现代化整个美国海军的舰艇啦，以及整个海军的架构等等。那我在担任陆军部长的时候，我也是非常重视，就是美国在西太平洋地区的地面部队的现代化，空军我们也是积极在发展我们的相关的太空军的编制哈。那我们所以是可以说是在美国在全方位的军事现代化都是非常全面的。那再来就是说台湾的方面呢，台湾当然我刚刚有讲到说要强调不对称作战的能力，那所以呢一定要确保台湾的国家以及全体的人民呢都有非常健全的装备，能够有效的吓阻中国。不对称作战呢，基本上这样子的一个方向是正确的，而且在台湾的政界在这一次访问当中也发现，政界其实都有高度的共识。我认为这样子的方向非常的好，但是台湾在发展不对称作战方面呢，应该要更加的快速。所以我刚刚讲的就是预算啦、研发购买武器啦、动员，还有义务兵役等这4个重点呢，基本上我都已经说过了。如果能够做到的话，台湾就能够对外向外界发出一个非常好的讯号，代表台湾正在积极的自我防卫。那人民也是台湾防卫的基础。那只要有这样子积极讯号释出的话，那美国以及美国在这边的盟友们对台湾的防卫会更加有信心。
Thank you very much, Secretary Esper, for this 4 concrete and very useful recommendations. Okay, so shall we continue to the next category? We do next regional security and economic and trade cooperation. 我们就进入到第2个有关于这个经贸跟区域方面的这个问题。We have first from Liberty Times， 我们也有自由时报一轩提问。那一轩在问，北约新版的战略的概念，首度把中国视为系统性的挑战。今年的峰会也邀请韩国、日本、澳洲跟纽西兰等国家领袖出席，这显示了北约关心的范围触及到了印太的区域。想请问，台湾在面对中国威胁的第一线的时候，请问台湾跟北约有哪一些互动或者是合作的可能性，可以彼此强化防卫跟吓阻 ？From Liberty Times, from Emily, and she's asking, for the first time, NATO described China as a systemic challenge in its new strategic concept. And leaders from South Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand were also invited to this year's NATO summit. These developments show that NATO has expanded its sphere of concern or influence in the Indo-Pacific region. And as Taiwan lies on the front line against the threat of China, in your opinion, Mr. Secretary, what possible forms of interaction or cooperation could Taiwan and NATO engage in that it would bolster Taiwan's defense and deterrence capabilities? That's the questions from Liberty Times. Also related to regional cooperation from New Tang Dynasty from Dongxu. Dongxu is asking questions regarding Quad. And the question is addressed also to Secretary Esper. During your tenure as Defense Secretary, cooperation among Quad countries made significant progress. What are your views in the prospects of Quad For instance, would it become institutionalized organization or a military alliance could be possible? Would it expand its membership? And also on July 14th, you stated that South Korea could be included. So in what role and in which way can Taiwan, do you think, participate in the Quad system? 所以这是想要请教这个部长的艾斯培部长，在他国防部长任内 Quad 的合作有这个显著的进展，想请教他对于 Quad 的这个前景的观察，是否会走向比较制度化使得的一个组织，还是军事同盟有没有可能，会不会扩大相关的成员，以及他在4月14号所提到 Quad 应该纳入韩国，所以请教台湾能够用什么样的一个角色来参加 Quad? Also from the new Tang dynasty from Dongxu about NATO this time. And the question is addressed to Secretary Esper and also Ambassador Stefanini regarding the extension of NATO security cooperations in the Indo-Pacific. And the experts such as Miles Wu describe that the alliance can be expanded and to become a new form like North American Indo-Pacific Treaty Organization. In your opinion, what measures might be feasible at this moment? 想请教两位对于有关北约组织扩张维护印太的和平，像余茂春这个他有认为可以扩大成为北约可以变成北大西洋公约跟印太公约两者合为一这样一个扩大性的一个组织，他想问这个目前这个是不是一个可行的模式？ And also from Apple Daily News, we received questions from Faya. 苹果日报志玲提问，美国发起的 IPEF 在外界认为是抗衡中国经济的联盟。IPEF 强调要深化供应链、基础建设、劳工权益、视为标准税收等领域的合作。但是13个成员当中有11个都在区域全面经济伙伴关系协定 RCEP。就你们来看 ，IPEF 在亚太区域能够发挥抗中的影响力吗？另外，请教 IPEF 首轮没有邀请台湾的考量为何？ The question is from Apple Daily News, Faya. She's asking about IPEF and RCEP. She said the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, IPEF, initiated by the United States, is seen by the outside world as an economic alliance, perhaps counter China. If IPEF emphasizes the deepening of cooperation in such areas as supply chains, infrastructure, labor rights, digital standards, and tax collection. However, 11 of the 13 IPEF members are also members of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, ICEP, led by China. In your opinion, can IPEF truly exert the influence against China in the Indo-Pacific? Furthermore, what would you think were the considerations of leaving Taiwan out of the first round of the country's negotiation participating in the IPEF? A lot of questions. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think I'll take the first run at them and then see if the ambassador wants to take a run at the questions as well. The first question with regard to NATO. I think it is very significant that South Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand were invited to the summit. And secondly, that the strategic concept spoke to the systemic challenge that China presents to not just NATO, but to the democracies of the world. As I said in my opening, I believe we are in an era of great power competition. And I was not just overjoyed by the fact that our European allies have stood firm in the face of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but also that countries of Asia, namely Japan, Australia, and Korea, also stood up and stood behind Ukraine in its hour of need. I think there is a recognition that, again, that we are in a global struggle now between the democracies of the world and the autocracies of the world. And so that's why I think it's important that NATO take this on. It was something that I worked on constantly with my NATO partners when I went to Brussels to talk about the threats and challenges that China presents to NATO partners, NATO allies. And so I was very pleased to see this taken up in the concept. So that's the first one. I think as we look down the road with regard to cooperation or participation in exercises or whatnot, that might be a form of cooperation. The next question with regard to the Quad and the prospect of the Quad, I think the Quad has been a great development that has been supported through successive administrations. I was pleased to push along the Quad as well during my tenure as Secretary of Defense. I do believe that the Quad should be expanded over time. I have made the case that I think South Korea would be the next good entrant to the Quad. I guess that would make it the Quint. But there also needs to be space for the Quad to allow other countries some type of insight into what's happening. Now, maybe that's some type of observer status. I don't know, but I think the notion of providing such room is an important consideration that they should take up. The question with regard to a new North Atlantic Indo-Pacific Treaty Alliance, look, if I had to form an alliance in the Indo-Pacific, I would begin with the United States' bilateral treaty partners and build a multilateral organization around that first. So in other words, if I could snap my fingers, I would love to see a multilateral alliance between the United States, Korea, Japan, Australia, and the Philippines. In my view, that would be a great place to start in terms of building a multilateral collective security organization in Asia. And I think that, frankly, that is something that we should pursue. On the last question, with regard to the economic frameworks, I believe that IPEF is an important framework. I think it was a mistake that Taiwan was left out of the IPEF framework. After all, Taiwan has been an effective and responsible stakeholder in the World Trade Organization. And so I think that, again, I think that was a mistake. I do not see RCEP as being a credible competitor, if you will, but it will depend on the terms that each organization offers. I don't see it as completely credible because I don't think you can rely on the Chinese to live up to the obligations they make. They certainly have not done so within the WTO framework. They have not done so with regard to nonproliferation. They have not done so with regard to other UN Security Council mandates. So I think joining an economic framework that includes the Chinese has to leave the other participants in some doubt as to whether they would truly live up to their obligations and meet the terms of such an agreement. We've seen too much Chinese bad behavior in such forms in the past.
Thank you. Excellent. So shall we allow some translation for these important words, and then we will continue with Ambassador Stefanini. Yeah, 嘉豪, please. Yeah.
好的，首先第一个关于北约的问题哦，对，的确，我认为说就是看到像韩国啊、澳洲啊、纽西兰、日本的领袖呢有加入峰会，我觉得是一个很重要的事情。那尤其是还有说在战略概念里面也特别提到，就是中国是一个系统性的挑战呢。我是个人是非常乐见的，因为现在我们在一个这个时代呢，就是所谓的强权在互相竞争的一个时代，所以呢，我当然一方面也是乐见看到欧洲集体站起来，跟着乌克兰一样，就是面对俄罗斯这样的事情，而且不只是在欧洲，也乐见的亚洲呢，同样也看到日本啊、澳洲跟韩国呢，也是都站起来跟着乌克兰站在一起对抗俄罗斯。那因为我们现在在一个时代里面，然后所有的民主国家都在跟威权国家在进行这样子的一个争端，所以呢，我相信北约其实在这样子的一个时代里面有其重要的责任。所以我每一次去布鲁塞尔的时候呢，我都会跟我的北约的伙伴朋友们都会特别提起讨论许多跟中国相关的威胁与挑战，无论是对方是我们的盟友还是我们的伙伴，我们都会进行相关的讨论。所以呢，也非常高兴能够看到新版的战略概念呢有把中国视为系统性的挑战。那事实上呢，我自己在担任在第二个问题是在讲跨的问题还有跨的未来。那事实上，我觉得跨其实是个很棒的一个发展。从美国在前一个任政府跟这一任政府呢，其实都有延续下来，都有很好的发展。那事实上呢，我在担任国防部长的期间呢，我本身也是推动跨的工作。我认为跨的应该也要扩张。我当然也有主张过，南韩应该是下一个 Quad 的候选的会员哈。那事实上，整个 Quad 除了应该扩张之外，也应该要有更多的空间，让其他的国家以各种方式来参与，例如说包括担任观察员等等，这样子的一个空间都是很重要，应该要去考量的议题。再来就是要扩大变成是北大西洋与印太公约这件事情。我觉得美国在印太地区的所要进行的集体防卫的工作呢，当然是要跟我们本来就已经有双边共同防卫的一些伙伴朋友呢进行先优先进行这样子的一个多边亚太地区共同防御的一个体系，先这样子建立起来，再往北约的方向走。所以我觉得亚太地区最适合的一个多边防卫体系呢，应该是美国、菲律宾、澳洲、日本跟韩国先从这一步开始走。那至于IPEF 的部分我觉得首轮没有纳入台湾是一个错误，因为呢，台湾在世界贸易组织呢长期来都是一个正式的会员，而且是一个负责任的会员。那我不认为 IPEF 能够跟 RCEP 能够相提并论，能够这样子的去比较。那当然我们知道 RCEP 是以中国为首的，中国在世界贸易组织当中其实有许多他们的责任跟义务呢是没有履行的。那除此之外，我们在中国我们也看到中国在许多其他的国际组织有许多不良事迹的不好的记录，像是在联合国的安理会，其实他们该应负的责任也是都没有负责。
Thank you very much. I would like to Ambassador Stefanini. Thank you.
Thank you. As ambassador to NATO, I'd been sort of selling cooperation, military cooperation with NATO to some, let's say, difficult partners. And there is a reason for that. There is no military in the world that would not like to cooperate with NATO. NATO has what I call the Microsoft operating system in the military. You may be friend or not friend of NATO, but you want to be able to have interoperability with NATO. Until 2014, Russia did have cooperation with NATO. So clearly there are political difficulties for Taiwan, but they can be overcome. There can be innovative way to cooperate under the screen. There's a good example. There's NATO military cooperation with Kosovo, which there are 4 NATO countries that do not recognize Kosovo. So there are examples. On the, we call it enlargement. The Russians, in a derogatory way, call it expansion. That's the first time I hear about extension of NATO. The answer at this point in time, I don't see it possible, NATO becoming also an Indo-Pacific alliance. But NATO can do basically 2 things for the security of this part of the world. The first and the obvious one is, to the extent NATO, especially in this case the Europeans in NATO, builds up their military, they relieve the US to some extent of the commitment to Europe. Obviously, in the very short time, the opposite is happening. But if you look at the sort of medium term, this could help. So that would allow the US to have more resources for this part of the world. The second is that in a sort of overall strategy of containing China, which is, to my knowledge, the very strongly rooted bipartisan policy in the US, NATO and the European Union have an important role in what I would call non-territorial domains, like cyber, like asymmetric, where it doesn't matter where you are geographically, because the threat is the same. Finally, just let me make a short comment regarding IPEF and the RCEP. If you were one of the 11 out of the 13 countries that participate in both, you'd look at it as a beauty contest. Which one of the two organizations becomes more vital, can offer a better deal to my country? And if there is continuity, especially on the American side, the answer is IPEF. Much of obviously will depend also to what extent China looks at RCEP simply as an instrument to strengthen its economic leverage or as a true instrument of cooperation. So there is scope for both, but the one which will be more liberal, more forthcoming, more open, will be more successful.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Stefanini. Al-Jaho translation. Thank you.
身为北约的大使哈，事实上我也是跟代替北约，也是跟很多国家洽谈很多非常困难的合作案件。那事实上，我觉得说这些合作案件都有存在的必要啦，因为事实上我们讲究军事跟军事之间的许多能够互相操作性，所以我们认为说我们北约里面本身就有一个类似像微软的一样的一个作业系统，是一个互通的一个作业系统，能够让许多的伙伴呢军队彼此之间是能够互相操作的。那事实上，我觉得说台湾跟北约之间的安全方面的合作呢，其实当然有其政治的困难，但是总是有一些创新的方式能够克服这些困难。例如说，像我们北约里面就有4个成员国不承认科索沃，但是我们北约还是跟科索沃有所合作。那事实上，我们虽然说在这个时间点，俄罗斯也觉得我们北约在扩张，我们北约也的确有扩张的必要，但是呢，我目前虽然看不到说北约有跟印太地区直接形成一个新的公约组织的一个可能，但是我觉得北约在印太地区的安全方面其实可以做2件事情。第一件事情就是加强我们北约在印太地区的资源以及合作的承诺。那再来第2件事情呢，就是说北约跟欧盟呢必须要进一步强化刚刚所提到的所谓不对称作战的能力，还有网络的防卫能力等等。那再来第3个议题就是讲 IPEF 跟 RCEP 的议题哈。那事实上，如果你是这13个国家当中那11个同时有参加 RCEP 的国家的话，其实从他们的角度看，他们比较关心的是 IPEF 跟 RCEP 对自己所释出的条件何者比较有利。那再来，同时也要观察说 RCEP 以中国为首，那中国会把 RCEP 当作强化他们经济影响力的工具，还是一个跟我们自己国家合作的工具？那如果同时间相比之下 ，IPEF 是一个更自由、更有弹性、更兼容并蓄的一个经济框架跟经济合作组织的话，那我相信 IPEF 也会比较成功。
Okay, thank you very much. With the permission of Secretary Asper, we move to the next category. We'll be doing the threat from China and specifically U.S. policy towards Taiwan. We received questions from Up Media. 我们收到上报佩芬的提问，他来问就是受到国内经济跟社会问题的影响，拜登政府在内政上面临很大的压力，其中选举的情况不一定乐观。经验显示，这些情况通常可能会使美国政府更倾向避免跟中国敌对，对中国施压也会减弱，甚至可能转向友好。想请教拜登政府是否有出现这样子一个迹象？面对这种情形，台湾的民众常感到不安，台湾政府的亲美路线也将受到在野党的质疑。想请问，对于台湾政府有何建议？ The following is a question from Up Media. Payfen, the U.S. economic and social challenges have exerted substantial domestic political pressure on the Biden administration, and the prospect for the upcoming midterm election might look bleak. Experience has shown that under such circumstances, the U.S. government could be more inclined to avoid hostility with China. might ease pressure on China or even be friendly towards China. Is the Biden administration, in your opinion, showing such inclinations? And facing these conditions, the public in Taiwan has exhibited a sense of apprehension. The pro-American policy of Taiwan's current administration has also been called into question by opposition parties. What are the suggestions do you have, Mr. Secretary, for this Taiwanese government? We also received questions from China Times 中国时报孟丽的提问。孟丽在问，前一阵子您说过一中政策已经无用处，需要检讨。想请问您认为符合当下时空背景的一个中国政策应该如何，又应该如何运作？ China Times Meng asking about One China policy. In the past, Mr. Secretary, you remarked that One China policy has outlived its usefulness and is in need of re-examination. What kind of One China policy do you think is needed to fit the current situation, and how should it work? Also from China Times, Meng Li raising second question regarding the defense budget. 孟丽提问，您在担任国防部长任内，通过对台军售高达总额100亿的美元，其中包括 F-16V 海马斯多管火箭的系统，暗插这个暗制鱼叉飞弹等多有助于台海防卫的武器。然而，拜登政府到现在的军售都是比较属于是后勤补给的，而没有注重提供新的武器。想请教部长怎么看拜登政府的军售政策？ Question from China Time, Meng Li. During your tenure as Secretary of Defense, the total value of arms sales approved to Taiwan was over $10 billion. These include the F-16V jets, the HIMARS rocket launchers, coastal defense cruise missiles, and other weapons that might help boost the defense of Taiwan Strait. However, since the Biden administration took office, arms sales to Taiwan have been focused more on logistical supplies instead of providing new weapons. What's your take, Mr. Secretary, on the Biden administration's weapons arms sales policy? Also from the New Tang Dynasty, 新唐人的电视东旭提问，也是请教艾斯培部长，您在7月14号布鲁金斯研究院谈话说，强调共产中国是全世界民主国家最致命、最危险的战略的这个对手。那2020年9月的第二次世界大战结束70周年，您在珍珠港的时候表示，美国对当前世界的承诺跟1941年相同，随时要作战捍卫任何朋友。想请教您，主张美国对台应该要放弃战略模糊，有哪一些事情需要做的？譬如说提升公众教育，还是跟盟友沟通吗？The questions from New Tang Dynasty addressed to Secretary Esper. In a conversation with the Brookings Institutions on July 14th, you emphasized once more that the Communist China is the most lethal, most dangerous strategic adversary of democracies around the world. In September 2020, during events to mark the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, you remarked in Pearl Harbor that America's commitment to the world was the same as it has been in 1941, and that America remained ready to defend its allies at any time. Your position is that the United States should abandon strategic ambiguity over Taiwan. In order to do that, what must be done, for example, in terms of educating the public and communicating with allies? Also, next questions from Tang Dynasty as well, from Dong Xu. Dong Xu 提问，请教您对安倍前首相台湾有事，就是日本有事，也是美日同盟有事观点的评论。The Tang Dynasty, what is your take on late Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, his remarks that Taiwan's emergency is a Japanese emergency and therefore an emergency for the US-Japan alliance? From Epoch Times, 辛怡提问, Cindy is asking, do you think that after the passing of the former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, the competitiveness and strength of the US and its allies against the Chinese Communist Party in the Indo-Pacific region could be weakened. Will the CCP think it has a greater chance of winning a war with Taiwan? 大纪元心仪提问：您认为在日本前首相安倍逝世之后，会不会削弱美方跟盟友在印太区域对中国竞争跟对抗的能力？中共会不会因此出兵台湾或更有胜算？心仪同时提问：面对中共的威胁持续升温，此刻台湾正在加强军事武力来保护台湾，但是有声音可能认为台湾高度武装或许可能升高两岸的冲突的螺旋，或是制造更危险的风险。您是否认同这样子的一个说法？ Second question is from Cindy. As the CCP, Chinese Communist Party threats continue to increase, Taiwan is strengthening its military capabilities to defend the Taiwan Strait and its national security. However, there are also voices of concern that think that a spiriting conflict could escalate across the Taiwan Strait, creating risk of an even greater crisis. If Taiwan continues its military build-up, Mr. Secretary, do you agree with this kind of argument? Also, last questions from Cindy, also from Epoch Times. 心仪提问：目前关于中国何时出兵台湾的这个说法众说纷纭，从中国12大以后到2027年都有。就您个人的判断，什么时候是中国可能对台湾军事威胁的最敏感的时刻？您认为美方该做怎么样子的一个防范，或者是因应这一类的危机 ？Epoch Time from Cindy. The question is also addressed to Secretary Esper. There are different views on when the Chinese Communist Party might use force against Taiwan, with predicted date ranging from the 20th National Congress of China to the year 2027. In your statement, what would be the most dangerous time for CPP to possibly launch an attack on Taiwan? And how can the U.S. prevent or respond to this potential crisis? Okay, a lot of questions, and then we'll be inviting the Secretary and our guests to respond freely. Thank you.
Okay, yes, there are about 58 questions there. I feel like I'm taking my college entrance exam again. Should we take them one at a time and answer them one at a time, or all at once?
One at a time would be better, right? 他就一个一个回答，然后我们再一个一个翻译，好吧？这样大家听得比较清楚。Yes.
Okay. On the first question, with regard to what's happening in the United States and what does it mean for Taiwan and others, look, the United States goes through these periods when it looks more inward than outward, and that's been true throughout our history and will be true going forward. I would say this much, though. If there are two things that Republicans and Democrats agree on in Washington, D.C., the first is that China is a strategic challenge to the United States. And second is that the United States must defend its friends in Taiwan. We must support them. So given that, I think that you will see continued firm support for Taiwan and for our allies in the Indo-Pacific, regardless of what happens in the United States, regardless of what happens in the next election and going forward. There is that strong of a view, I believe, in Washington, D.C. That said, that is still reason for the Taiwanese government to move forward on the reforms that I noted up front. Significant increases to the defense budget, asymmetric warfare strategy focus, capabilities to support asymmetric warfare, a lengthening and toughening of conscription, and fourth, revitalization of the reserve mobilization. Those things are critical regardless of what happens in the United States or elsewhere if Taiwan wants to continue to deter Chinese coercion, if not invasion.
Any translation for that?
好，就美国的国情以及对台湾的意涵哦，事实上呢，美国有些时候呢，关注他们自己国内的力气呢，甚至会比关注外面的多，有些时候会这样。但是无论今天在 华府呢，无论是共和党还是民主党，其实这两党在华府的共识就是一，中国是个战略的挑战；再来二呢，就是美国应当要捍卫台湾的朋友。那所以说，我们预期接下来会持续看到美国坚定的支持台湾，以及坚定的支持亚太的许多的伙伴跟盟友，无论其中选举以及美国的社会经济的状况如何哈。那其实也是讲到，无论美国的状况如何，实际上台湾该做的事情还是得做，就是要去进行我刚刚讲的许多的国防方面的改革举凡，像是增加国防预算啦，把焦点放在不对称作战，而且也要有相关的战略武器装备去支持这样子的不对称作战的能力，还有兵役的延长、兵役的精实化，还有动员的能力等，这些才能够有效吓阻中国的侵略跟威胁。
Now, on the next question with regard to the One China policy, yes, I do believe that the One China policy has outlived its usefulness. I'm not confident that it is a sturdy foundation upon which to build relevant policies going forward. Why is that? Well, so much has changed since the One China policy was first articulated in the early 1970s. The key phrase being that the United States acknowledges that Chinese on either side of the Taiwan Strait maintain that there is but one China and that Taiwan is part of China. I would argue that a majority of people today in Taiwan do not identify as Chinese, they identify as Taiwanese. And secondly, clearly a majority of people in Taiwan do not believe that Taiwan is part of China. Those are two important parts of the One China policy, which I think point out that it's no longer useful in terms of helping us chart a way forward, a more responsible, a more effective policy toward both China and Taiwan. I might also add, so much has happened here within Taiwan. It is now a thriving democracy that has seen multiple transitions of power in over 20 years, certainly well before or at the time of One China policy's articulation. It has a very robust economy. It has two competing political parties. And it has its own identity now that is different than when the One China policy was articulated. So for all those reasons, I believe that we need to have a discussion within the United States about what our policy is going forward, and not one that's built on the architecture of the past, an architecture built in the 1970s.
Very well said. Thank you so much. We need a translation, thanks.
的确，我说过一中政策目前没有用了。那至于为什么呢？是因为当初1970年代初期我们行诉一中政策的时候呢，美国当时的说法、当时的认识就是说，认识到海峡两岸都存在中国政府，那这两个政府呢，都认为自己是一个都认为自己是一个中国，而且台湾属于中国。但事到如今，到了这个年代，已经有多数的台湾人不认为自己是中国人，而认为自己是台湾人了，而且大部分的台湾人也不认为台湾属于中国。因此，光是这两点，美国当初在1970年代初期对于一中政策的制定的两大基础呢，基本上都无法再进一步帮助我们去形塑这个时代适合的对华政策以及对台政策了。那现在如今我们看到台湾是一个非常繁荣的民主、繁荣的经济体，20年以来呢，也都看到了多次的政党轮替，跟1970年代那个时候大不相同。所以美国应该要去讨论未来，而不是把未来建立在过去的论述上面，1970年代的论述上面。
The third question with regard to U.S. arms sales to China, it is true that I'm a very big proponent of arms sales to Taiwan, wholly consistent with the Taiwan Relations Act. I've been working national security issues regarding Taiwan since the 1990s. And so I know them fairly well and believe strongly that the key to preserving Taiwan's sovereignty and its position against China is that we continue to support those sales. I think, again, going back to my original statement, there is a consensus within Washington by both Republicans and Democrats to support Taiwan. And more importantly, or as importantly, it is the law under the Taiwan Relations Act that we would provide the means, the capabilities, the services for Taiwan to be adequately protect itself. So we had very good discussions this week with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of National Defense, and of course, President Tsai. And so we, as a delegation, of course, intend to go back and share with our colleagues at the Atlantic Council and with leaders in Washington, D.C., the importance of the arms sales, the nature of what Taiwan is requesting, consistent with what the United States is pressing for, and the urgency by which they should be fulfilled. And that is one of the commitments we made in our discussions so far this week.
Thank you so much. Great. Translation 大家好。
再来就以美国对台军售方面来讲，我长期都是非常支持美国对台军售的，也是长期支持台湾关系法。那事实上呢，我从90年代起呢，就一直参与许多台湾相关的国家安全的一些议题的讨论和相关的工作，而且我强烈的深信哦，就是说台湾要保卫自己的主权，最关键的就是美国对台湾的军售。我刚刚也说过，在华府，无论是民主还是共和党，共识就是要支持台湾。那支持台湾也是符合我们的法律的，因为我们有台湾关系法。台湾关系法也规定说，美国有义务要提供给台湾相关的武器以及相关的能力，来进行自我保卫。所以这个礼拜来台湾，跟外交部长、国防部长还有蔡总统都有许多深入的讨论。我们这些讨论的成果也会带回去，跟我们的太平洋理事会的同仁，还有在华府的许多领导阶层的人士，进一步去传达，就是对台湾军售的重要性，以及台湾防卫、台湾军售方面的许多的迫切性。
The next question was with regard to strategic ambiguity, and yes, I believe that it is time to move beyond strategic ambiguity towards strategic clarity. Now, why is that? There were at least two reasons given in the past for strategic ambiguity. One was a concern that if we gave too much clarity, that the government in Taipei might take it upon itself to provoke a conflict with China. I have never found that to be the case. I do not believe it to be the case. I think successive Taiwanese leaders have shown great wisdom and prudence with regard to their relations with China. The second thing, and more importantly, is the fact that China has continued to use coercion, military muscle, and other techniques to try and change the status quo in the Taiwan Strait, to bully its neighbor in Taiwan, which is wholly inconsistent with the U.S. view of the relationship between the three countries. We state very clearly, I believe, in the Taiwan Relations Act, that any attempt to change the status quo through non-peaceful means would be regarded as be treated as a very grave concern and a threat to security in the Pacific. So I think for those two reasons, it is time to move beyond strategic ambiguity into greater strategic clarity. And I think this is, again, another topic that is so important that there needs to be a national discussion back home in Washington, D.C. amongst our political leaders and a consensus reformed with regard to this going forward. Now, what would help us move that conversation along and what would enable Taiwan supporters like myself to further make the case is, again, if Taipei would quickly move forward and make the changes I believe it needs to make with regard to defense reforms. I've said them several times already, everything from significant increases in defense budget through conscription into reserve mobilization improvement. All those things are not just important for Taiwan's self-defense, but also send important political signals to Washington, to friends and partners in Asia, to friends and partners in Europe, that Taiwan is serious about its own self-defense and concerned about its own self-defense in order to make bold political moves that affect its population, its country, its future.
Excellent, very well said. Thank you. Translation for 大家好 please.
有关战略模糊转向战略清晰这件事情，的确我们有这样子的相关的考量。那当然，以前我们认为战略需要模糊，是因为以前会担心哦，就是说如果战略太清晰的话，以前的领导人可能会错误解读，然后会无端的去挑衅中共。但事实上，我们观察了这么久，这件事情从来都没有发生过。我们只看到台湾领导人其实都对于中国的事物都非常的谨慎。 那再来第二点，我们也同时看到中国持续的在威胁，并且透过军事的力量企图改变台海的现状，并且也一直在霸凌着台湾。所以，我们美国其实《台湾关系法》就已经写得很明白了，就是说，任何以非和平的方式来改变台海现状呢，都会引起美国非常重大的关切。所以呢，这就是为什么我们认为现在是比较适合从战略模糊转向战略清晰。而且呢，其实像这样子的一个议题呢，其实兹事体大，所以我们在华府这边也必须要有很多深度的讨论，达成共识。那台湾这边如果要帮助我们达成共识的话，其实最好的做法就是我刚刚说的，必须要进行许多的国防改革，举凡刚刚说过的，比如说要增加国防预算啦，兵役要延长，要更精实，然后有强化动员能力等，像这样子的改革呢，都能够向我们华府这边，还有向欧洲还有亚洲的盟友呢，去提出更好的信号，让大家都知道台湾其实对于自我防卫更加的积极。
The next question, with regard to former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. First, I think we all mourn his tragic murder. And I've sent my condolences to his family, his friends, and of course the people of Japan. Shinzo Abe was a visionary leader, a remarkable leader who led Japan through difficult times, but also had the vision to articulate a free and Indo-Pacific, which has become in many ways the policy of the United States and other countries. And I think he was correct when he was saying that a Taiwan emergency creates a Japanese emergency, which is an emergency for the Japan-US alliance. I think that any type of conflict that erupts across the Taiwan Strait would be hard to contain, particularly given American bases and supply lines stretching back to Japan, and oh, by the way, to Korea and other locations as well. So I think that's why the Taiwan issue is not just a Taiwan concern or a US concern, but it's a regional concern, and I would argue that it's a global concern. I've said on other occasions that I see Northeast Asia, which stretches, in my view, from the Korean Peninsula to Taiwan, as the greatest strategic flashpoint of the 21st century. It is in this area where we see multiple nuclear powers. We see the world's largest economies. We see some of the greatest technological hubs internationally. And we see the world's largest militaries. And there's no way that a conflict in Northeast Asia, whether it's on the Korean Peninsula or in the Taiwan Strait, does not have major consequences and ramifications for the international order and for the international economy. And so for those reasons, I think it's, again, imperative to pursue many of the things we discussed. And I think Prime Minister Abe's leadership has left a legacy in Japan and subsequent leaders that will continue to fulfill his vision and see the need, as we see happening right now, for Japan to also strengthen its military, to look at redefining or rationalizing its constitution to allow it to be a greater player in the regional and in the this epic contest we now see forming between the democracies of the world and the autocracies of the world.
Thank you. Very true. Yes. Translation, Jiahou. Thank you.
对于安倍逝世，我们当然表示都非常的难过，也向他们的家属呢提出慰问。安倍前首相他是一个非常有远见的政治家，他也带领着日本呢度过许多的难关，也强力支持着自由的印太地区。他说的没有错，台湾有事，日本有事，也是日美同盟有事。因为呢，在台湾海峡爆发任何的冲突都非常容易往外扩大，因为台湾海峡毕竟牵动到了非常多美国在西太平洋的补给线。也就是说，这台湾的议题基本上也就是美国的议题了，甚至更甚者是一个全球的议题。事实上，在东北亚也一样哦，就是我之前也说过，朝鲜半岛以及台湾是21世纪西太平洋最重要的最危险的战争引爆点，因为这从朝鲜半岛到台湾这样子一条线，经过了非常多拥有核武的国家，世界上非常大的经济体，还有非常多科技的中枢，因此无论是朝鲜半岛还是台湾，有任何的冲突都很快呢就能够波及到周边的地区，波及到全球的秩序以及全球的经济。那安倍前首相的政治工作为日本留下了非常多，也有非常多的后人会延续日本前首相的工作。那日本的确也正在 强化他们的自卫力量，也进一步想要修宪，这样子的话就能够让他们在这个地区扮演更大的角色，以及在民主对抗威权的纷争当中呢，也能够扮演更大的角色。
Thank you.
So the next question tries to answer the question, does Taiwan strengthening its military capability, will it lead to conflict with China? I like easy questions. The short answer is no. Look, I am a Ronald Reagan Republican. I believe in peace through strength. Frankly, I believe that weakness invites aggression. If Taiwan does not strengthen its military capability, it will send the wrong signal to Beijing. It will signal, first of all, lack of capability, but also lack of resolve, a lack of willingness to defend itself. It is absolutely important, it's critical, that Taiwan continue to strengthen its capabilities, that it do so in the manner that I and others, and I'm sure the Pentagon, are outlining, to build the most capable, most ready force to deal with a range of scenarios. But also, I think Taiwan needs, and this is where the United States needs to help and others, needs to broaden its partnerships with others and make sure that Taiwan is not left to itself to deter China or defend against it, but it does so with friends and partners from around the world, beginning with the United States, but also with regional allies such as Japan and Korea and others, and then European partners as well. I've been very impressed over the last few years. I know it happened during my tenure, that we had some of our NATO allies in their role as sovereign countries, for example, contributing to freedom of navigation operations in the Western Pacific. So all those things are very important. So again, the answer is no. I think you preserve peace by preparing for war, and I think otherwise you invite aggression from the mainland if you fail to do so.
Excellent. Thank you so much. 嘉豪。
下一个问题就是台湾提升军力会不会进一步提升跟中国的危险哦？那事实上其实就是一个字啊，不会。那事实上我当然本身也是个共和党的人士，那当然我本身也认为说，要和平就必须要有自己的武装力量。那如果自己的力量薄弱的话，反而会引起别人来欺负自己。那如果台湾的军事力量如果薄弱的话，那会给北京释出一个讯号，就是台湾不但缺乏自我防卫能力，更缺乏自我防卫的决心。因此，我觉得一大重点就是台湾一定要增强自己的军力，并且为各种各样的状况呢去做好所有的准备。那当然，这一点美国也应该要帮忙台湾，就是提升我们跟许多国家的伙伴关系，包括台湾，要确保台湾在面对中国的时候不是单打独斗。那当然从美国开始。帮助台湾，那再来下一步可能就是日本、韩国，甚至欧洲也会投入到台湾的防卫能力。那事实上我也很乐见这几年以来，有许多的北约的盟友呢，其实在印太地区都有许多的军事行动，譬如说像是自由航行的军事行动等，其实我都非常的乐见。所以呢，台湾的提升军事力量反而会让台湾更加的安全。
So the last question is, in my assessment, when will be the most dangerous time for a CCP attack on Taiwan? I think there are two times when it will be most dangerous. One is if Taiwan would, for some reason, unnecessarily provoke Beijing. And I think that is not going to happen. I have found that successive Taiwan administrations to be wise and responsible and would not do something like that. I think the second time would be if Taiwan fails to invest in its own defense capabilities, fails to make the necessary changes, and fails to do so quickly. That gets back to my previous answer that weakness will invite aggression from China, particularly if China, after the Party Congress, continues to suffer through a number of domestic issues that the country itself faces right now. There is always that tendency by authoritarian leaders to reach out, to find an external foe, to create an external conflict whenever they are unable to deal with problems at home. And I think, again, Taiwan is not going to give them the reason to do so by doing something irresponsible that might be provocative or by failing to invest in its own defenses. And that again is why I think that these reforms are needed now and quickly to make sure that we send the proper signals, not just to the people of Taiwan and not just to Beijing, but also to Washington and to Taiwan's other friends around the world, especially in Europe.
Thank you. That's so well said. So important. 嘉豪, please translation.
最后一个问题在问说，中共什么时候最有可能打来，什么时候最危险？我觉得危险的时刻大概有2种，第一种就是台湾基于什么样的理由，基于不明理由去挑衅中共，但我认为这种事情不会发生，因为台湾的政府长期以来都非常有智慧，也都非常的谨慎。再来第二点就是台湾卸下自己的防卫，那如果台湾要像刚刚讲过，就是说，如果弱小的话，就会让别人更愿意欺负你。所以台湾绝对不能卸下自己的防卫，甚至呢，我刚刚也讲过，台湾必须要进行许多的国防改革哈。那现在呢，我们正在看到整个中共政府他们面对他们国内非常多的动乱，非常多的状况哦。那我们也知道说，对很多独裁国家来讲，如果他们没有办法平息他们自己国内的民怨、国内的一些状况的话，他们很有可能会对外制造一些外部的冲突，来掩盖自己国内的状况。那当然，这个时候台湾也不会说去挑衅中共，那也不会去卸下自己的防卫。但是呢，台湾真的应该好好做好国防的改革，才能够对台湾人民自己释出正确的讯号，对华府讯出正确的讯号，甚至也让北京看到。
Thank you very much. I know Mr. Pavel, you would like to respond? Thank you.
Sure. I just wanted to reinforce this last issue of urgency. It is completely unpredictable when Xi Jinping might decide, and he is really the only decision maker, to increase aggression or coercion against Taiwan or just invade for various reasons that we only know are in his own mind and are very hard to predict. So that urgency means that Taiwan needs to really increase its preparations. As the Secretary said, if you think about Ukraine, no one knew a year before that Vladimir Putin would invade the entire country, murder hundreds, thousands of innocent civilians, destroy cities. No one knew that. But it's a very similar situation in the fact that it's an authoritarian dictator who has his own reasons for committing aggression against another country. So anyone that says they know exactly when Xi Jinping is going to move, it's March of 2027, whatever the date, I would not put any confidence in that date, and that could be soon. So that means, to take the preparations now, because it would be horrible if something happens soon and America, Taiwan, your other partners would be really regretful. Why didn't we take more action sooner? Why didn't we prepare for asymmetric capabilities? Why didn't we increase conscription? Ukraine, even though they're doing a lot, they regret that they didn't do things faster and more effectively. So I just think it's really important not to pretend that we know when Xi Jinping might take an action, and not to pretend that the future is going to be exactly like the past. We do not know.
That is so true. Very well said. 嘉豪, please. Thank you.
我要补充一点哦，就是这件事情，就是说到底中共什么时候会打台湾？其实这个问题是有其迫切性的，因为我们没有办法预测习近平何时会基于自己个人的意志或片面的决定，然后增加对台湾的威胁，甚至进攻台湾。所以这意味着说，这样子的迫切性意味着就是台湾必须要及早做好准备。那其实就像刚刚艾斯培部长所讲过的一样，其实1年之前也没有人料得到普丁会入侵乌克兰，然后造成乌克兰大量的民众流离失所，丧失性命。这就是独裁者他们的行事风格，就是他们会基于自己的一个意志，然后自己的理由去对外发动攻击。所以说什么习近平可能会在2027年攻打台湾之类的，像这样子的一个说法，其实我们只能说很难说，有可能会更早。那如果是更早的话，那比如说如果中共很早就是攻击台湾的话，那美国以及台湾各界都只会后悔，说怎么不及早开始准备，及早开始征兵，及早开始进行不对称作战的准备。事实上，乌克兰就在后悔着他们为什么当初许多的作为没有更加的快速，没有更加的有效率。所以呢，对于中共何时会攻打台湾这种事情，我们不能假装自己知道。
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, like we are done with the pre-submitted questions. I know there's a lot of questions also on the ground. So how about you raise your hand? We do a ground, and then we let the secretary answer that. We start with TVBS Ting Ting, and then we also have Central News Agency Xiao Chao Joseph. Anyone else? Yeah, you can raise your hand or two questions. We take two questions on the ground. Ting Ting first.
Okay, hi. Hi, I'm Ting Ting with TVBS. So I have two questions. I'll keep them really short. So one is from my station, or from what I want to ask is that to Dr. Asper, is that in regards to the point that you think that there should be a revision on U.S. One China policy, there's concern even in Washington that revising this policies, including the strategic ambiguity issue, could put Taiwan in the brink of danger. So what is in your opinion that how it should be tweaked, to maintain the fine balance? And for the second question, it's I'm asking on behalf of SET TV, a fellow colleague, is that the new EU ambassador to China mentioned that in a recent interview, it's important to allow China to have continued stronger influence in the world, and this raises speculation on whether more pro-China stance may resume in Europe. What are your views? Thank you.
All right, Ting Ting, would you like also to state your questions in Mandarin so everybody can know, or Jiahao can? Yeah. The first question, can you also rephrase that? Is I understand it is how to reach the right balance in...
Okay,
yeah.
So I'll just repeat my first question is that there's concern in Washington that revising the One China policy and the strategic ambiguity may actually put Taiwan on a brink of, closer to a brink of danger, and that in your opinion, how should that be tweaked to maintain the fine balance? So in Chinese, there will be like, 有提到说有关于要可能重新的去调整有关一中政策，还有相关的战略模糊。那这部分可能会有一些声音跟舆论会忧心说，可能把台湾推向于更接近危险之际。那要如何的去维持这当中的平衡？然后另外一个问题是有关于说欧盟驻中国的大使有提到说，要让中国有更就是在世界上有更明显的一些角色。那这个会让外界担心说，目前在欧盟当中会不会出现更多比较亲中的声音？谢谢。
So, with regard to your first question, again, I would argue that the One China policy, which was adopted in the early 1970s, which is now 40 years ago, is no longer sufficient for the reasons I outlined. I might also add that China, Beijing, has done its best over the last 4 decades to try and redefine One China to its own ends. In fact, it's tried to identify One China policy to look like its own One China principle, and we reject that. So my point is that we need to have this discussion in Washington about what our policy should be going forward, because I'm not sure that the One China policy as it currently stands is sufficient and sturdy enough to bear the weight of the future policies and strategies we need to pursue to avoid conflict in the Taiwan Strait. And then on your second question, the ambassador probably wants to respond, but this gets to the question really about China's rise. I don't have a problem with China's rise in the international system, but it has to be within the international system. It has to be within the international laws and rules and norms that have allowed peace and prosperity for billions of people around the world now. By the way, no less than the Chinese people itself have benefited by the current international system. We can't allow the Chinese to rise within that system and then try to dismantle it and take it apart to suit their own ends, to suit their own means, to suit their own values. So that's my issue with the Chinese foreign policy and policies with regard to the current international system.
Very well, so shall we make the translation first? Is that okay? Yeah, we'll do translation, then inviting ambassador to speak later. Yes.
其实我刚刚已经就一中政策已经讲过，就是美国的一中政策是1970年代，也是40多年前就已经成型的，但是事到如今已经没有足够的效果了哈，因为 其实我们也都知道，北京他们40多年以来，其实也都努力的在整个国际上面去重新定义所谓的一中政策，各国的一中政策，把各个国家的一中政策讲的好像是他们自己的一中原则一样。事实上，我是反对这样子的做法的。这就是为什么我们在华府的高层需要再重新检讨，去制定一个适合未来的一个一中政策，因为当前的一中政策已经不足以形塑未来的像对华政策、对外政策，也不足以去有效的防堵，就是在台海这边可能会发生的冲突。那其实我对于中国在全球体系内的崛起没有意见，但是中国的崛起必须要在全球体系内，并且中国应该要去遵守国际的常规以及国际法。事实上呢，中国在国际体系当中，其实对于他们中国的民众有得到了很多的好处哈，因为中国在体系当中崛起了。可是中国的政府呢，却试图想要把整个国际体系呢去瓦解掉，然后重新再建造一个适合他们自己的价值、适合他们自己的路线的新的国际秩序。那这是很不好的。
Thank you. Exactly. The point is not about denying China or Russia, for that matter, influence. The point is about that influence is exerted following certain rules within the multilateral system, within a rule-based international system. This is why, connecting to the previous question, a Taiwan emergency is not simply a US-Japanese emergency, is a world security emergency. Like a North Korea emergency would be a world security emergency, or Ukraine is a challenge to worldwide security.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Okay.
其实刚刚就是欧盟驻华大使他们这样子的说法，并不是说我们其实并不是反对中国跟俄国就是参与国际政治。事实上，我觉得就是真正的重点在于说，中国以及俄国他们是否有在遵守国际相关的法律啊、相关的规则，以及是否能够保护好所谓的以规则为基础的世界秩序。那其实我刚刚在谈到之前那个问题，就是台湾有事就是日本有事及日北同盟有事，事实上呢也是全球安全有事。就像是在朝鲜半岛上面如果有事，或者是乌克兰有事，也是全球的安全有事是一样的。
Thank you very much. I know Joseph from the Central News Agency. Joe.
Okay, thank you, Secretary. I just want to confirm that you just said that you recommend that young Taiwanese boys and girls serve at least 1 year, if not longer, in the military, because currently only Taiwanese men need to. So you just mean Taiwanese men, right? Not boys and girls, because there's a difference because currently only Taiwanese men need to.
Well, that's a decision, obviously, for your political leadership, whether it's men and women.
Yes.
In the United States, it's men and women serve in our military. Women have made tremendous contributions in our military. And so I'm just articulating my view that I think you should draw from the best of your population. And my view is that women can contribute as well in any number of ways. Look, if war comes to Taiwan, and if the Chinese invade this island, they're going to attack everybody. And it's going to be every man, woman, and child fighting, not just to preserve their country, but for their lives. And I think it needs to be taken with that seriousness and that urgency. And again, it's for your own political leaders to determine what that looks like. I just see it in those terms, that it becomes a war of national survival, just like you're seeing unfold today on TV out of Ukraine. The Russians are making no discrimination between men and women, between children and seniors. It's just that nature of conflict, and that is the conflict that we see authoritarian regimes execute or conduct campaigns like that against other people. So that's the extent of my comment, is to make sure that the country is prepared and is preparing for such a conflict.
Thank you very much. Gender equality. Okay, so we make a translation. Joe, let's wait for translation. 家豪, thank you.
刚刚艾斯培部长有提到，就是说建议说台湾的男生跟女生都服役1年。那当然，台湾目前是只有男性需要服兵役了。那艾斯培部长他会这样说，是因为在美国的国防脉络当中，服役的基本上男性、女性都有。所以刚刚艾斯培的讲法是按照美国的脉络在进行发言。当然，如果中国发动战争侵略台湾的话，他们攻击的对象是台湾的所有人，不分男女老幼。那台湾的男女老幼也是全部都必须要站起来捍卫自己的性命。事实上，我们在乌克兰看到俄罗斯的军事，其实也是男女老幼不分，这就是战争的本质。那独裁的政府对其他国家的人民的做法，其实也是如此。那提出这个建议，就是台湾的兵役延长的这样子的建议，只是要确保说台湾能够做足准备，而且用正确的方法做好准备。
Thank you very much. Joe, another follow-up questions?
Very short one. Just want to follow up because Secretary said Taiwan needs to add more defense budget. So I'm not sure, in your view, how much more is enough to make a better deterrence to the Chinese invasion?
Well, that is a very good question, and I hesitate to throw out a number. Without seeing what the strategy looks like, because the strategy drives the size of the military, the weapon systems, the capabilities, and all that. So I hesitate to throw out a number, but let me give you my sense of scale, though. I think for political reasons, it would send a very powerful message about the seriousness of Taiwan's commitment to its own defense if its percent of spending per GDP at least matches the United States level percent of spending per GDP, which is around 3.2%. And then if you look at other countries that face similar situations, and the one that comes to mind is Israel, I think their spending is above 5%. And I understand that is a lot of money to put out for defense, but national survival is at stake here. And if you're really serious about that, then I think this is a consensus decision needs to be taken by the country, by the political leaderships, to significantly increase defense spending. It may not be done in 1 year to those levels, but it needs to grow and grow soon so that you can make sure that you can address the conventional capabilities you need, but particularly the asymmetrical capabilities that you need. And also, if you return to a longer-term conscription, that's going to require more infrastructure, more trainers, all those things. So doing what you need to do is not inexpensive. It's quite expensive. But as we used to say, the only thing more expensive than preparing for war is getting involved in a war. And the only thing more expensive than getting involved in a war is losing a war. And so I think for those reasons, that's why I think a political consensus needs to quickly form, decisions need to be made, and with great urgency move out along those lines of effort that I and my colleagues have shared throughout this discussion.
Thank you. Very true. Very important. 正好 translation.
好的，问题本身就是艾斯培部长有提到建议台湾增加国防预算，但是要增加多少才足够呢？那艾斯培部长的回答是说，这个问题他无法随便丢出一个随机的数字哦，因为必须要先了解到台湾的国防的具体有哪一些的策略，那这个策略会牵动到台湾需要的武器系统啦，需要建构的防卫能力等。那就以政治方面要释出的讯号来讲呢，就是台湾必须要释出一个积极在整备防卫的讯号。那这样子的一个讯号，它背后要反映的一个数字，就是台湾就是防卫的预算占 GDP 的一个占比，至少要跟美国相当。那美国的话是3.2%的 GDP。那如果再去看到跟台湾处境类似的国家，例如说以色列的话呢，那以色列是5%的 GDP 作为国防预算。那当然这样子做非常的昂贵，但是这事关台湾的生存，所以台湾必须的整个国家乃至于政府呢，必须赶快下定决心，必须要快速的增长，无论是传统的军力还是不对称的战力，都必须要快速的增长。那刚刚讲到延长兵力，我知道这也是会牵动到相关所需要的基础建设。那基本上该做的事情本来就不会便宜，但是当然整备国防很昂贵，但是如果国防没有准备好，被打了，代价更高。那打输了，代价就是最高。所以呢，不要去 太嫌弃那个代价。这就是为什么我才会跟这一次访问台湾，才会把我跟很多同事讨论出来对台湾的建议呢，都向台湾都有提出来。
Thank you very much. Let me check. There's no more questions on the ground. Yeah, if not, it really, I want here to witness my deepest appreciation, for the historical visit of the Secretary Asper and the delegation of the Atlantic Council here. Their visit to Taiwan, we've been long awaiting for his visit. I am deeply inspired by his word, his suggestion, recommendation, his resolute and determination and the suggestion that has given to us. Thank you so much for coming to Taiwan, and we hope to see you more and more, and I'll be more inspired by your suggestions. Also, my appreciation also to Ambassador Stefanini, also for your presence here. Very important words for us. Thank you also, Mr. Pavel, for your visit here accompanying the Atlantic Council. It's so important a cooperation between the Council and Taiwan. Also, thank you to each one of you for making it possible, for being here, for your great questions, very challenging one, and also for the kindness of the Secretary for responding one-to-one to your questions. Those are very, very, very marvelous, really, really inspiring. And so we hope to see him really again. 然后真的谢谢大家的今天参加，然后我们也谢谢国防部长，他真的是一一回答了问题，90分钟以后一个一个回答，好吧？我们一起谢谢他。Thank you so much. Thank you. Hope to see you again.